Mr. Mack.
Hi,
Hi.
Ariel. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. So
Great.
thank you so much for taking your time and doing this interview. I really I appreciate it.
You're
I
welcome.
really like your book, Time to Make Art, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the interview today. So
Sounds
can you
good.
tell us a bit more about yourself in the book?
Okay, sure, I can. Yep, my name is Jeff Mack, and I'm an author and an illustrator. I have been writing and illustrating books for about 21 years, and I've done almost 50 books at this point.
Oh, that's
So
a
some
lot.
of them I've illustrated for other authors, and many of them I've written and illustrated myself. Um, so let's see, I've done everything from early reader books to picture books to middle grade chapter books. And yep, my newest one is Time to Make Art.
Yeah.
And I can tell you a little bit about where I came from. So I grew up in Syracuse, New York, which is right in the middle of the state. It's a big state. I
Yeah.
live in Massachusetts now, and I'm actually closer to New York City, where I live in Massachusetts, than when I lived in New York State. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a big state. Massachusetts is a small state. Let's see. So my grandfathers, when they were little, or not little, but when they were in high school, they played basketball together in college in Syracuse. No, I'm sorry, in high school. They played basketball together in high school in Syracuse. And my mom and dad, they met each other at a high school dance. And then my dad went to college in 1969. He moved to Boston, but he missed my mom so much that he moved back to Syracuse a year later, and they got married. And I was born in 1972 while they were still going to college. And I first place I lived was up at the university there, in a special apartment that the school built for students who were married and had children, and so they could live on campus and go to
Yeah.
school at the same time.
Yeah. So what inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, right. So, what inspired me to be a writer? So, when I was a kid, my parents read to me all the time. On the weekends, my grandmother would take me to the library, and we'd come home with big stacks of books, and my parents would read them. But, they also encouraged me to learn how to read them on my own. So, first book I learned to read on my own was Fox and Socks, and I was pretty excited about that. And also, when I was in second grade, I had a really good second grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Costello. She actually was also my kindergarten teacher. And at that point, I loved to write and draw comic books. And I would draw comics about my family, and I would draw comics about monsters, and I would draw comics about monsters eating my family. And my teacher loved these, and so Mrs. Costello, she hung them up on the walls in the classroom for my friends to see. And a lot of my friends started asking me if I would illustrate their stories. So I did. I turned them into comics and made more of my own. And I've been kind of doing the same thing ever since second grade.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. So how'd you come up with the title?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So the title for this book, Time to Make Art,
Yeah.
at first I didn't know what I wanted to call it, right? So I just knew I wanted to write a book that had lots of questions about art. And I loved art. And I have ever since I was a kid. Um, and I just liked the kind of art that um, where I thought that the ideas were just as important as the way the art looked. So
Yeah.
I wanted a book. I wanted to write a book, like kind of an art history book, that asked lots of questions. And so the first title I had, just as I was working on the story, was called Why Art? Because a lot of the questions I was asking in the book were, why did these different artists make the art that they made? And why did they do it the way they did it? And as I was working on it, I realized, well, I needed a main character for this book, right?
Mhm.
Somebody that
Yeah.
reader could kind of relate to, and
Somebody who asked the questions, yeah.
exactly, yeah, someone who would ask the question. So I'd made this drawing of this girl, and this is actually the drawing that I made, first drawing I did of this girl, and I did it really simply, and I did it by with collage. So I painted on pieces of paper, let's see, just like different shapes that I painted on paper. And you can see I would cut them out, or sometimes I'd use my computer to cut them out. So I did like a circle and a square and another shape for the legs and another shape for the beret. And I collaged them. Yeah, and then I drew on top of them like the face and the hair. And I wanted to keep it really simple because I think that the simpler the character is, the easier it is to imagine that you're that character in the book going around and talking to different people. So that character, she is the one who asks the questions. And as I worked on it a little more, I thought, well, this character, she's going to have to ask all of these different artists from all throughout history, all these questions about their art. So I thought, if she's traveling through time, I would call it Time for Art. And
Yeah.
that was the next title that I used. But then as I worked on it a little more, I thought, well, why is she asking these characters? Why is she asking all these different artists about their art?
So she's gonna make art.
Exactly. She's going to make her own art,
Yeah,
right?
it literally says in the beginning, time to make art, and then she has all these questions.
Right, right. Because at first she can't figure out what she wants to do, right?
Yeah.
And she doesn't really know where to start, and so she starts asking questions. So I thought, well, okay, if she's making her own art, then I'm going to call it Time to Make Art. And that's how, and that idea stuck. That came out to be
Yeah.
the story title. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed how when I take off the outer cover, in the very back it says that like she's it says let's get started, and then the thing is like she
Yeah.
the whole painting.
Yeah, that's called the case of the book, right? When you take off the jacket and you've got that another picture kind of hiding underneath. Yeah, so okay, so what happened is, all right, you see all these shapes, right?
Mhm.
So these are all like the shapes that I painted onto different pieces of paper. When I was starting to make the art for the book, I just painted all these different shapes, and then I scanned them into my computer, and then all of the different artwork and all of the characters in the book are made out of all those different shapes.
Yeah.
And so then at the end, when you take off the jacket and you look at the case, this right here, this was my palette. So this is when I was mixing up the different colors for all of those different shapes. This is what was left behind, the palette, the piece of it's kind of like well, I think I used like the top of a box for a shirt that you get at a store.
Yeah.
And that was just what was left. And I thought, well, that's a kind of a cool looking image. And maybe if I put the girl who's starting to make her art at the end, like you were saying, where is she? Right, so there she is just starting to make her art. And then I thought, well, maybe this could be the thing that she makes. And so there she is making it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was fun. I always try to think of something.
Yeah, that was very creative. That was very out of the ordinary.
Thanks. Yeah, like the book that came before this one, the other art book I did, another one was called Marcel's Masterpiece.
Yeah.
And if you take off the case of this one, he's like coming through this paper wrapper that covers the book. So yeah.
Yeah. So who was your favorite artist that you brought into this book?
Wow, that is a tough question. My favorite, because I like so many of
Or
them.
top three if you want.
Top three. Okay. Let's see. Well, okay, I'm a big fan of well, I'm a big fan of Marcel Duchamp. He's in the book. I think he's a really interesting artist.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Michelangelo, who painted the Sistine Chapel. And oh, here's an artist that I like a lot. I'll probably change my mind if you ask me tomorrow. I'll have three different ones. This artist right here, his name is Tom Friedman, and he's a really
You just,
cool artist.
just had
Yeah.
a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, when people ask that question, like, how long does it take to make art? Right. And all these different artists over here, Keith Haring says a minute, Eric Carle says an hour, Christine Harvey, who's this really cool Maori tattoo artist in New Zealand, she says 100 hours. And then this guy says he stared at this blank piece of paper for 1,000 hours.
Did he
And
like really do that?
he really did it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he says he really did it, right? I believe him.
Yeah.
It's an
So
it's an
probably
interesting
he probably
idea.
like took a break though,
Yeah.
or at least had a sip of water. Couldn't
I
go
think
that.
I think he didn't do it all at once. It wasn't like 1,000 hours in a row. Yeah.
That would be crazy.
I
Yeah.
think that would be way too hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that idea of like how long does it take you to make your art? Like, it's not really the most important part about making the art, how long it takes, right? You could make something really cool in a couple minutes, or
Yeah.
maybe it'll take you 10 hours. Who knows, right?
Yeah. It could take you 5 minutes, 30
Yeah,
minutes, as long as it takes. I feel like what really matters is like the way it ends up.
I think so. Well, also how you feel about it at the end too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're the artist, it's kind of like you're working to the point where you decide that it's the way you want it to be. And it doesn't mean that it has to come out exactly the way you planned,
Mm,
but at some point you get to decide when you're done or not. And I think that's one of the best things about being an artist is it's up to you, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
When you said that, like with all that leftover paint you had, you created um, the whole painting that the girl does.
Yep.
Whenever my brother and sister and I get something that includes paints, then, sorry. Um,
Sure.
so then what happens is that we paint it, we put it away to dry, and then we take a bunch of new sheets of paper, and then we just like take the paint and start lathering it on. Like,
Huh.
like so
Interesting. So
what
wait, so you're
happened?
saying you take a bunch of pieces of paper and you paint on them and you let them dry. And then
Yeah,
you take
like a real painting, and you put it away because this, and then in we take like there's usually very little left over, but there's still some left over. So we just take it like with our hand, and then we just like start painting, and
yeah,
then take all the colors and just mix it into some murky green, I think.
that sounds like fun.
Yeah,
That's
and then
cool.
in
I
the
love
end,
it when you don't know what you're gonna come up with. You might have some idea, but it's fun to just experiment and see what happens.
yeah, and then we end up getting a long shower and some scolding. So, can you tell us about your process of writing the book and how long it took to write it?
Sure. So I took about, I would say it took me about 2 years, but um it kind of went in not like one necessarily like one direction. Okay. So first thing I did was when I was starting to work on it, I wrote all the questions down that I wanted to ask about making art. Like I just made a list. And then I kind of tried to put them in an order that would, where one question or one answer might lead to the next. Because I just didn't
Yeah.
want it to be just random questions all over the place, right?
Mhm.
And then I started some sketches, and I made kind of a story. And in that time, like I was trying out samples of art, and I made the picture of the girl in the story. And so I really kind of put it together in that first year. And then I started working on the final art for the book. But while I was working on it, I thought, all those questions that I came up
Yeah.
with, some of them were really difficult to like think about. I thought they were too complicated. Um, and so I thought, well, I kind of need to rethink the way I've phrased some of the questions.
Yeah.
So what I did was I visited a whole bunch of schools in a couple of different states. and about 10 schools, and I had lunch with groups of second graders. And I asked them while we were having lunch, I said, okay, you guys, so if you got to meet like a famous artist at some point, what would you ask them? You know, and I was specifically talking like to groups of kids who like to make art themselves, right?
Mm.
And um and so they started telling me some of the questions that they would ask, and I thought, well, these are really good ways of saying some of the things that I was already asking with my questions. It just phrased it in a way that I thought was easier for readers who are just kind of like
Younger?
getting introduced to these ideas.
Yeah.
You know, kids who haven't, or adults even who haven't thought about art that much and want to find out more about different ways of making art. So I can give you an example. Like there was one part in the story where I was asking this question, like, what is beautiful? Okay. Which I think it's a, you know, it's different things for different people all throughout history, right? But it's very abstract. It's not easy to picture it in your head. So
Mm.
one of the questions that the kids asked me was, what do you use to make art? What should I use to make my art? Which is a much easier thing to imagine. Like you can use paint, you can use wood, you can
Yeah.
use stone,
You can use
whatever,
stone, you
clay.
can use clay.
Right. Exactly. So I took the question, what is beautiful, which had the answers, which I'd already written the answers, you know, paint is beautiful, wood is beautiful, stone is beautiful. And I replaced what is beautiful with the question, what should I use? And that became what was in the book. And so right up to the
Yeah.
very end of working on the book, I was still like thinking about the different artists who were going to be in the book. I got rid of some of the artists that I had put in there and replaced them with other artists and changed the questions around. So like 2 years of working on it, but it wasn't all straightforward. It was lots of back
Yeah.
and forth. Yeah.
It's sort of like you can't just stare at a piece of paper for $1,000. I mean,
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. And I think it's true for like almost anything like that you're working on. Like if you're writing something
You can't just
or
do it nonstop. Like you got to take like at least 5 seconds of a break or more.
you got to take breaks, definitely. It helps to work on other things.
Mm.
Like if you're working on something and it isn't quite working out the way you want it to, it helps to like put it away for a little while and then come back to it later, you know, work on something else.
Yeah.
I think also like if you're working on one project, sometimes if you can't solve the problem with that project, you can work on another project, and something you do in that project might give you an idea to go back and fix the problem
Yeah.
with the first project. So yeah.
So what message or theme do you hope readers learn from the book?
Okay, so I think I think there's probably kind of two things. Number one, I hope that readers will like kind of learn about or encounter new types of art that they hadn't
Yeah.
thought of before. You know, I think a lot of people think like good art is when you can draw just like a photograph, right? But I mean, we have machines that can do that, right? So it's a good skill, but like, how are you using that skill to express yourself, you know,
And again, anything is art. Like it says in the book that that if you just paint a bunch of nothing, it'd be art.
it could be, right? It could be. I think like this palette itself is probably not art by itself. I mean I could hang it on my wall if I wanted to because it looks kind of nice.
It
But
does.
but I think the important part about this is the way it connects to the story, right? So like it's just a palette, but I used it as the case for the book, and it relates to these things, and these things make up all the things in the book. So
So it's like
because of
a
all the
coloring book,
ideas behind
like
it, it makes
layers.
it, yep.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is I just want kids to know, you know, like art doesn't have to be perfect. And I think when I was a kid, I'd get frustrated with my drawings. They wouldn't be coming out right. You know, I'd be frustrated with the stories I was writing. Somehow they didn't sound the way I wanted them to sound.
Mm.
And I tend to want to give up. And I think it's really important not to, you know, it's like you got to be open to making mistakes. and letting those mistakes kind of send you in different interesting directions. And also,
Yeah.
I think like if you get stuck, it's a good idea. Well, here's what I do. Here's what I think. I think if you want to write a story, I recommend writing your story as fast as you can and don't read it after you've written it. Instead, take it and like put it in a folder, or put it in a drawer, plastic bag, whatever you want to do. Just get it out of there, right? Go do something else. And then later on, come back and read your story. And you'll be like a little bit emotionally distanced from it, right? You can read it. It's almost like you can read it more clearly
Mm-hmm.
because you've been thinking about other things. And
Yeah.
when you read it the second time, then you can kind of decide, well, okay, I'm going to fix this part. I'm going to change this part. And you work on it like that. And you can then do that and then put it away for a little while and do something else and then come back. And you kind of keep repeating that till it comes out the way you want it to.
Yeah. So if you could go back in time
Mhm.
and if you could give yourself one piece of advice, and what would it be?
So if I could go back in time, wow. Um, okay. So I think, like I was saying, I was pretty frustrated. And I don't know. I think I'd tell myself, be nice to yourself. Be nicer. Like if the drawing doesn't come out, like if you admire an artist and you're trying to work like that artist, like that's fine for learning skills, but really you want to find your own way of making lines of kind of like, expressing yourself. So if you're trying to copy somebody, it can be really frustrating because you never quite get it right. And if you're just doing it, just finding your own way of making something,
So you're saying like make your own art?
make your own art and don't be too judgy about it. Don't be too hard on yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're gonna make mistakes. Learn to love the mistakes you make. Learn to like the things that you make.
Yeah.
Don't spend all your time comparing them to other things.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's really important. Yeah.
So if you could give any piece of advice to kids who want to become authors or authors who are authors, what would it be?
Mhm.
Or any drawing advice?
Drawing advice or writing advice? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's that idea of just write your ideas down quickly or make your drawing quickly and don't get drawn into rereading it and saying, oh, this isn't what I wanted right away. If you put it away for a little while and come back later, I say that's probably the best thing you can do. And then don't be afraid to rewrite the thing. Nobody's going to
Mhm.
see the mistakes. Nobody's going to see the version that you don't want them to see. You can just keep working on it
Yeah.
until it's ready to show. Yeah, you get to decide when you're going to show it.
Yeah. So what do you enjoy doing for fun other than reading or writing or drawing?
What do I do for fun? I spend a lot of time writing and drawing. Let's see. When I'm not doing that, I like to ride my bike. I like to go for hikes. So right at the end of my street down this way, there's the start of a nature trail, and if I follow that, it goes all the way up to the top of a mountain, which is really nice. So I'll do that. I like to listen to music, especially weird music. The weirder, the better, I think. And I like to listen to podcasts, especially podcasts about history and about philosophy, which is like, new ways of thinking about the
Yeah.
world. Yeah. And I read, I spend a lot of time reading. I read all
Yeah.
kinds of things. So, yeah. And I read books for kids, but I read a lot of books for adults too.
Yeah. Are you planning on writing any more books?
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. I have written the next two books that are coming out are about these two characters named Dog and Pony. and they're like early readers, but I did them kind of like graphic novels. So they're really simple, all told with dialogue. And I was just asked to write a third book for that series, so I'm excited about that. So I'll be working on that. I would really like to do a new like nonfiction book, like Time to Make Art. So that's something that I'm planning and I've already started working on. I have some other ideas for picture books that I'm working on too. I have a lot of things that are sort of like half written, or I've written the story, but I've only done half the pictures.
Yeah.
Um, so I've got that, and then I'd really like to write another middle grade chapter book. And I wrote an outline for one just a couple days ago, like 20
Yeah.
chapters. Yeah.
Do you have any graphic novels out?
Sort of. So I did these chapter books that are kind of like graphic novels. They have lots of drawings in them, called Clueless McGee. And then I illustrated a series of 4 graphic novels. The author's name is Mike Broom, and he's a writer for television.
Yeah.
He's really funny, and they're called the Cryptid Club. And they're about monsters that live in these woods near this elementary school, and they're like invading the school, and there's these kids at the school who are trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So like the first book has Bigfoot, and the second book has the Loch Ness monster who keeps popping up in the toilets in the school. The third book has the Chupacabra who keeps stealing the school lunches. And the fourth book
I don't
has,
think that bad.
they're good. They're really funny. The guy's a really, really funny writer. He sends me the script, and it's like he writes them like a play. So it's just the words that the characters are saying. And then I get to figure out what the characters look like and what they look like when they're saying it and what they're doing in each
Yeah.
scene. Yeah.
Have you been enjoying that?
Yeah, it's fun. I like mixing it up. I like when I can write and illustrate my own books, but I also like when I am illustrating a book for another author. In some
Yeah.
ways, when I'm working for illustrating for another author, I don't have to question if I'm doing the right, like coming up with the best way to tell the story, because the author's already written the story.
Yeah.
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 So it's a little bit of a break for me.
Yeah. So thank you so very much for
Yeah.
doing this interview today. Um, it was really nice of you to take your time and do it. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Me too.
So yeah. Good luck on your future books.